Thank you so much for joining me for yet another episode of the Human Centered Leadership Podcast. I have with me in the studio today a very special person who I recently met, but was blown away by all the things that he's done. But more importantly, after a long conversation, as it turned out, we realised that we had such similar views on leadership, and these have been tried and tested. These are not just theoretical viewpoints that we have. My next guest will demonstrate to you how he's applied his thinking and his values around leadership and what results he's got from that. So as you know, the Human Centered Leadership Podcast is really about bringing emotional intelligence into practice, demonstrating to the world out there how important and how powerful emotional intelligence can be if you embed it into your cultures and into your leadership thinking. So my next guest is Dr. Spencer Pitfield OBE. I've read Spencer's his CV essentially, and he has been such a busy man over the past 2 or 3 decades. He's been involved in everything. The one specific area that we will be talking to him about is his work in a charity called PACE, but he has done so much more. So I'm going to allow Spencer to introduce himself. Welcome to the show, Spencer.
Cool, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to speak to you and obviously your listeners on the podcast.
Well, it's great having you here. Spencer, I mean, I can't even do it justice. Would you mind just giving like a bit of an overview of all the incredible things that you've been involved in?
Yes, I've lived a busy career, Kul, over many years. I started off as a professional musician. A few would know that, but I played in professional orchestras, travelled the world. Then after being a professional musician, of course, that's about a team. It's about playing with 85 other musicians. I then got to work at the Purcell School of Music, a specialist music school, taught for 20 years and was very blessed in being able to teach some of the finest young musicians, particularly in our country and from overseas. And that was a great pleasure. And then most recently, the last 4 years ago, as you said, I was the CEO of a charity called PACES for young people with cerebral palsy and adults with motor disorders.
What an incredible role that must have been. But Spencer, you know, as I look through all the incredible things that you've been involved in politics.
Yes.
You have been the governor of literally all the NHS Foundation hospitals across Sheffield.
That's correct.
Managing, I think it was it £1 billion worth
Yes.
of budget
Yeah.
across these 5 hospitals. I mean, that's an incredible responsibility. I don't even know how to ask this question, but what has inspired you in your life to reach for the very highest levels of echelons, will I say?
Cool. I think it's a really good place to start because it's about, as a leader, as an individual, as a person who's wanting to affect positive change, you've got to be emotionally connected with what you're doing. And all of the things that I've done in my life, they've really been about wanting to make that difference. Now, we all want to make that difference, and we can all make that difference in whatever we do. But it has been about wanting to help, particularly people who would like to get better in their education, or indeed people who are disenfranchised, trying to get a situation where we can do the very best given the means that we have before us. And I think this links in nicely to what we're talking about today, because it's all about how do you get the very best. And like you, I believe that that's about people, and it's about being emotionally centered in the way that you approach leadership, and that gives the best results, I feel.
Given all the incredible positions that you've held, if there was one common thing that you'd say has helped you to be successful in those roles, what would it be for you?
Yeah, I think it's really an understanding that everything begins with the people that you work with. And from a young age, they've never been staff people that I work with, they're colleagues. We work with colleagues in a team, and it is about people, and it's about understanding what makes those individuals tick. It's all about the family around them and the work environment, but it's all about people and about good people coming together to try and do the very best in whatever they're hoping to achieve. So it's been very much a people-centered life and work experience. And I do believe that if you get those things absolutely right, then the sky is the limit for what you can achieve. But it is at its heart about people. And of course, people are complicated. We're all complicated. We have all sorts of things going on. You come into work on a Monday morning and you've had a difficult weekend at home with the family, and then you've got to start to do things. So it all starts with people and understanding what makes them tick and who they are, but very much also understanding their heart, their emotional centre, and why they come to work. And I really do believe, I've always believed that people come to work. Of course, we come to work because we need to earn some money to pay our mortgage and all of the other things. But people come to work because they want to do good. They want to improve things. And that can be for government. It can be in an educational setting. It can be a private sector setting. But you come because you want to make things better.
Yeah, I love that. I'm minded, Spencer, of a management model way back when that I was taught about theory X and theory Y leaders. And they used to say that theory X leaders were the type of leaders that believe that people were only motivated by money. And theory Y leaders fundamentally believed what you just said, that, you know what? Most people actually want to do a good job wherever they go. They want to have a sense of fulfillment in the work that they do. So, inevitably it leads to a greater level of trust in the staff that work for you. But also it's about developing trust with the staff as well, so that they trust you. I very often talk about in healthy cultures, in healthy organizations, there is this foundation of trust that goes both ways. What's your thoughts on trust in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, trust is critical, and just to touch on the fact that I agree with you, Kul, the best employed colleagues are not there for the money. The money is a sort of, it's something that comes along with the role, but they're not driven by money, and that's really important. They're driven by something which is inside, and it's to make that positive difference. Trust is a critical issue because you cannot succeed as a leader without trust. And people talk about building trust, but I would say that trust is almost an innate thing which should be there from the moment that you as an individual start to work with your colleagues in the team. And that really comes initially from the decisions you make together and how people see that you follow through on those decisions. But then there's something deeper, and it's about you as the individual. It's about you as the emotional self. What kind of person are you, Spencer, as a leader? Do people, I suppose, like you? Do they share your values? Do they connect with you as a human being? And I mean, that comes through in all sorts of different things. What did you do on the weekend? Well, I ran for a charity and we raised some money because we care about this. Or I helped my family because I have a family member who's poorly at the moment. These things overspill into your work environment, and almost without the knowledge that people are doing it, we're all looking at one another. We're saying, well, what do we think of Spencer? What kind of person is he? Does he absolutely live and, follow through the kind of things that we believe are important? So trust is absolutely at the centre of this. And then I would say, Kul, absolutely, it's that emotional centre. I talk about the head, the heart and the gut. The head is fairly straightforward. It's a no-brainer, as I say. You're going to make the right decision, you believe, using your intellectual forward sort of front lobe to make that decision. The heart, it becomes a bit more complicated because there's that heavy emotional element there, and then you've got the gut sitting below that. Of course, if you get all three in alignment, then you're rocking and rolling. It can only be fantastic.
Absolutely. But what you're saying there, Spencer, in amongst this issue around trust is that human beings are very, very complex because we all have complex lives. There are so many different facets that drive us as human beings throughout our entire lives. And if something is not quite where it needs to be, it can affect our outward performance. So part of being a human-centered leader is actually taking on more of a challenge, I guess, because it's saying to yourself as a leader, I am prepared to navigate my way through the complexities that make up human beings. But on the flip side, these complexities are also the beautiful diversity that makes us up as human beings.
Cool. Just to pick up on that, you have to address those. You can't. I've met some leaders in my life who've just walked on by those more personal of things. And I don't believe that you can as a leader. I do believe you have to be aware when a person's having some profound difficulty in their life, there is illness in a family member around them, you cannot just walk by. And this is really where that emotional centered approach lies, because clearly you've got to do the job. The day job is about together succeeding and moving things forward. But in order to do that, the people around you and the people that they work with, because it's not just about you working with the colleagues that are around you, it's the team that they then work with and about how those people who are working with that next colleague feel about them. And so it's really important that there has to be a humanistic understanding that sometimes things are difficult for individuals, and you shouldn't just walk on by and not comment or give a few moments thought about that. I think the best leaders will be very in touch and in tune with the fact that this needs a bit of time. You know, this colleague is struggling at the moment and we need to just have a little chat. How can I help? What can I do to lessen your load a bit? Usually the reaction is an incredibly positive one, because in our lives, people often race on by. The emails are going, the phone's going, they're not taking that time. So you are so right. You have to, if you do want the very best outcome, not only for the organisation that you're working, but for the individuals around you in their teams, you've got to be very connected with that wider picture.
I think that's so powerful. It's so powerful on so many different levels. It's almost like the Good Samaritan story here. And there's, unfortunately, in this world, there's almost this expectation from people that nobody's going to pay me any attention. If I'm going through some dark times, people will walk on by. And in those healthy organizations, what you're saying is, in healthy organizations, leaders don't walk on by. Leaders with, as they say, with great authority comes great responsibilities. Leaders understand that responsibility, and they will always stop and check to see where that person is. And for me, this is really about this, almost like a fundamental skill set that good leaders need to have, and that's empathy. So what does empathy mean to you?
Yeah, I absolutely. I would say this is critical, and empathy is so very important, because you can show in a very one-dimensional way some support for an individual who is struggling, but that isn't an empathetic approach to those issues. This requires a greater depth. So for me, really, the best leaders understand where they need to pitch the interface. And they do this almost as second nature. Wouldn't that be wonderful if you could just do it as second nature and not think about it? Of course, the rest of us, we have to think about this. We go home, we think about what's happened in the day and how we can make things better. But that connection, that absolute empathy and the sincerity of the connection is very important too. You know, we've all been around the school of leadership management greatness, which says keep your door open so people can come in to see you. Do walk through the open planned office because they need to know that you're around. That isn't great or good leadership. Great and good leadership are those special moments that are not planned, they're not orchestrated, and they are absolutely clearly and sincerely truthful in the way that they connect with colleagues.
Using your analogy, this is not just about walking from person to person or just making yourself visible. This is about stopping and chatting and talking to people and getting to showing a real interest in them as human beings, and understanding where they come from, what their likes or dislikes are, what's going on in their lives, what's going on, as much as they want to share, what their aspirations might be. I used to find it fascinating when I did, walk around, and I used to walk around and talk to all my staff whenever I had the opportunity. And I found out that there were some incredible skill sets that people had that weren't on their CVs, that I wasn't aware of, that could have been utilized elsewhere within the department. There were people there with degrees in communication and degrees in analytics and all of these incredible subject areas that I could have quite easily tapped into. So consequently, I was able to, second them into various pieces of work where they felt fulfilled, and they were like the round peg in the round hole.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's clear that when people are enjoying what they're doing, and particularly when they're connected, when they have that emotional connection with what they're doing, and that can be, when I was a bit younger, I did this course and I enjoyed this module, and actually now my employer's asking me to do something not dissimilar. It fires people up. They get that emotional connection. And so all of the time you're thinking about, as a team, as an organization, how can we play to our strengths? How can we be together in the best possible way? And I think that comes back then, Kul, really very much for me to everybody being connected with the vision of what you're seeking to achieve. Now, in some organizations, so for instance, I've just stepped back from a CEO role of a charity, as you've said, that was very clear because we came in every day and we focused on the children and the adults. How are we going to get that better outcome for them, and the things that will make them in a position where they can achieve the things that they can and want to achieve. But in other organizations, it's not quite so straightforward. If you're making plastic PVC pipes and they all look the same and they're fairly mundane, how do you find that emotional connection with what we're trying to do? So then it's about really understanding, well, lots of our pipes go to places where they've got plenty of money, but maybe 20% of our pipes go to Africa, where it's making sure people have clean water. And you engage with people on that very personal level where they understand that they as a part of the team are making that really concrete difference to people's lives.
So what you're saying is it's so very important to share with all your colleagues why you're doing what you're doing, the ultimate goal, if you like, of why we're doing what we're doing, whether you're delivering a service or whether you're delivering widgets. That's a key thing. And the other very important thing that you've talked about today is values. Now, I go into all sorts of organizations. I work with all sorts of senior leaders. And I cannot count how many times I've asked those senior leaders, so what are your values? And they'll point towards some document on the wall and say, hey, they're my values. Well, I say, well, no, they're the organizational's values. What are your values as an individual? And how do your values align with those values? I just feel that so many organizations don't do enough work around values so that people have a true sense of what values are, or they don't test values when they are employing.
Yeah, I think that's so right, Kul. And this idea that it's written down and those are our values, those aren't values. That's something that's been written down 15 years ago. As you say, how does that connect with the individuals who are seeking to achieve this now? And I always feel, and this is where it is so important to have these external independent perspectives. I always feel when I have the wonderful opportunity of visiting an organization or getting a better understanding and giving my thoughts and insights, if people are kind enough to listen to what I think, there's never been that headspace time. There's not been that opportunity for the team to come together. Now, I'm not talking about some structured every Friday afternoon we come together as a team and we go canoeing with one paddle backwards up the creek, and that's a team. But no, I'm talking about just time where people can come together and really center themselves emotionally and just spend that concrete time where they can think about what they're seeking to achieve and how they're wanting to achieve this. And this is where I think we need to be less formalized in the way that we encourage that team together. This is not about sitting in a lovely bean bag that's pink in the corner under all sorts of lovely pictures saying that I'm there to make the positive difference, and that's too simplistic for the world we live in now.
Yeah, I agree. I was talking to a CEO only this morning, and we were talking about these organizations and environments where we've painted desks in bright colors, or we have a track around the office where people can cycle on, or we created the sleeping pods, or all sorts of fancy meeting rooms. And they say, hey, we're a very people-centric organization. But then if you look at their policies are just the same as policies in many of the restrictive organizations that we see. So this facade that some organizations can create, and sometimes they create it to manage their own guilt complex, to satisfy themselves or convince themselves that they're being people-centric. For me, that is not enough.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And you can't just buy these things off. You can't invest a few £1,000s and you've got the track, so everything is going to be okay. My analogy always is that it's lovely if you had a really good classroom. Of course, it's going to be great if you've got good chairs and tables and a lovely, computerized screen. But that's nothing unless you have a high quality teacher who's emotionally connected and passionate about their subject. It doesn't really matter. You can have the lesson under a tree as long as it's not raining too hard. But if you've got that person, so you've got to make sure that the balance and the structure in these things is right.
The last question I want to ask you today is quite a powerful one, really. Now, you've talked a lot about something that we can only class as leadership discretion, which I think would be a really apt phrase for this. Now, leadership discretion, I think, has to have courage involved within that, because more often than not, you're making some decisions that go against the policy, perhaps. And a good example of that would be when I've had HR advisors saying to me that the person who has perhaps been off sick for 6 months should go on to half pay, despite the fact that this person is going through some really tough times with their health. They want to come back to work, but their health is not allowing them to come back to work. What are your views on leadership discretion? Can you name a situation where you've had to override a policy, if you like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to deal with the scenario that you've scripted there, Kul, in that situation, that individual needs to be supported. And usually in my experience, that whilst the guillotine might be coming down at the 6 months, they're not far away from getting back into full-time work. And they're trying their level best. So I'd be absolutely supporting that person to come back. If it meant that you had to go to the board and say, look, we need an extra 2 or 3 months to make this happen, I would hope that the board would be behind me as an individual to say that it's the right thing. We must support on full pay and get that person back in. And so you do need to, rules are there. I'm not saying rules are there to be broken. Please don't misunderstand me. But rules are there obviously to set the framework. But good leaders work with the framework and they make sure that they support their colleagues. And it's so very important for me because that one individual, everybody in the staff cohort where that person works will be aware that that person is trying to come back to work. They will be willing that person to come back to work, wanting him or her to be successful. You can't send out a negative message saying, I'm sorry, the guillotine's come down at 6 months. And then you've asked for examples in my own professional life. Yes, sadly, you do need to take difficult decisions on occasion. But I would always counsel all good leaders, take time, think again, take a few steps back, go sideways, forwards, 2 to the right, 2 forward. Think about whether you can do things in a slightly different way. Never knee-jerk reactions, never quick reactions, particularly when it's about individuals and their livelihoods.
Some really good sage advice there. Thank you so much for joining us today, Spencer. It's been an absolute honour, and your wisdom will have hit home with so many of the viewers of this podcast. Thank you so much, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks so much, Kul. All best wishes. Bye-bye.